Hello, Brubs. We're back with Dagny, as in Dagny Juel Przybyszewska, and not and the woman and the myth. Probably shouldn't drink a second beer, but before I intend to read. But what do I care? What do I care, bruv? 6. The poetry, and this is quite pertinent because I actually found the site that has some of her plays and some of her poetry roughly translated into English. So I think I will read those on this channel. Get some beer in me first. What was she, or chapter 6, the poetry. What was she looking for? Where did she want to go in this terrible night? She did not know herself. She closed her eyes and let herself drift unresistant. She did not know the way. She recognized none of these silent, dark witnesses of human sorrow and joy. She looked with dread into the lonely flames burning feverishly into the night. Speaking of sickness, of love, these secret flames behind high dark walls in the whispering green of the gardens reminded her of something in her own life, of the fever that had driven her out into the night. What did she want? What was she waiting for? In questa tomba oscura. Dagny was as much a part of the avant-garde as a poet as she was as a playwright. And let me make a note here, because when I looked over a few of the plays, they were literally, one-act plays at the best. At best, one-act plays. She was both a cycle of lyric, she wrote both a cycle of lyric poetry and a cycle of prose poems in the tradition of the French symbolists, sharing their preoccupation with mood, mystery, music, enigmatic symbol, and the decadent spirit obsessed with death. Once again, she had more in common with the men who were writing than the women, of whom so very few wrote poetry. She foreshadowed the great women poets of Scandinavia, such as Edith Sodergren and Corinne Boye, who would write their profound, painful verse 20 and 30 years later. In Norway, she belonged to the ranks of the poets of the spiritual breakthrough, including her old acquaintances from Christiania. Nils Collett Vogt, Thomas and Wilhelm Krag. She stood closest, however, to Sigbjorn Obsfelter, not only one of Norway's but of Scandinavia's most progressive poets of the time. One of the few who can truly be called a symbolist in the tradition of Baudelaire, Mallarmé, I still don't know how to say that, and Verlaine. Obsfelter had broken new ground in the poetic tradition of Scandinavia, experimenting with free verse, lyrical prose, and the application of music to the rhythms and structures of poetry. Dagny was obviously taken with his writing. She translated his short story, Live, into German for the 3rd issue of Pan, and she was said to have recited this poetry at the Schwarzviertel. His sounds must have excited her. He, too, was a fine musician, a violinist, and he made his poems sing like soft morning melodies, but it must also have been Obstfelter's vision, so desperately fixed on his experience of alienation, anxiety, and madness, that appealed to the poet in Dagny. That doesn't really cast any light on this. Sing me the song of life and death, the prose poem cycle. How he had loved her. His love had wrapped her in queen's robes and set a queen's invisible crown on her head. A crown everyone knew was there, to which everyone bowed. She had been queen in love's kingdom. He was dead. She felt at peace, relieved, almost happy. She stretched out her arms and breathed deeply, as if freed from a painful thought. The flowers in his garden of love had grown too lushly around her. The fragrance had choked her breathing. The tendrils had wound themselves around her life until she had felt bound hand and foot. Sing mir das Lied vom Leben und vom Tod. This mysterious flower, its fragrance filled her with a secret joy. She read her own longing in the flower's big, soft eye. She found something in it, something she had lost, a sound, a song in her soul. It sang a hymn she had forgotten. I tus morket, tus morket. In her prose poem cycles, Sing mir das Lied vom Leben und vom Tod, Dagny confronted the myth of the Queen of Love, poeticizing the nightmare of the recovery and loss of the poet's soul in the wake of her consuming attraction to the man who has adored her. The four poems tell of her inner struggle to find the seeds of herself. The critical tension lies in the vacillation between her desire for self-definition and her pathological need for definition in terms of another. Time and again, she is overwhelmed by a sick longing for her lover, spelling her spiritual death. Yet occasionally, briefly, she turns to herself and experiences moments of inner harmony and creativity that fill up the emptiness within her. The theme of the tragedy inherent in the myth of the love goddess was obviously a personal one for Dagny. She chose to write about it in the form of the prose poem, the genre favored by the poets of the fin de siècle. I still don't know that last one. The fin de siècle. The fin de cycle? For its freedom of form, which they hoped would allow them to express the intense moods and magical language of the unconscious. Baudelaire had written, "Who of us is there who has not, in ambitious moments, dreamt about the revelation of a poetic prose, musical without rhythm and rhyme, sufficiently supple and sufficiently flexible to subordinate itself to the lyrical rapids of the soul, the fluctuations of the dream, the spasmodic springs in consciousness." Dagny's poems are precisely similar to dreams or nightmares, abstracted from the constrictions of time and place, to emphasize the lack of specificity. Is that right? No. Specificity. She gave literary mottos to each in a different language. Specificity. Specific. Can't say it. I'm struggling. Specificity. That ain't right. Specificity. She gave literary mottos to each in a different language. The first, Sing mir das Lied vom Leben und vom Tod. Sing me the song of life and death. The second, Et la tristesse de tout cela, o mon ami, and the sorrow of it all, O my soul. The third, I tus morget at dusk. The fourth, in questa tomba oscura, in this dark tomb. To achieve her form, she relied on the structural patterns of music, a statement, repetition, and variation of the theme. Rather than the traditional patterns of prose, mood rather than story is the essence of the classical prose poem, as it is the essence of hers. Anxiety relieved by fleeting calm, melancholy briefly interrupted by joy. The vision is narrow, the concentration on the self absolute, intensifying the obsessive, anxious mood of the poems. I really wish I wouldn't have bit my tongue earlier while eating pizza because it really affects pronunciation there. The poems were first published in Polish translation in 1899 in Zaisi. A year later, they appeared in Norwegian in Sam Tyden. After Dagny's death, the poems, along with The Sin and When the Sun Goes Down, were published in Poland 1902 in Stasz's translations, which I've actually found online and will read because I'm sure people are just enthralled by this woman. When Dagny wrote them is unknown, though they seem to have been inspired by the Berlin years and the reputation she then enjoyed as queen in Love's Kingdom. She took the title of the cycle from the refrain of a poem by her friend Richard Demmel called Das Trinklied, the drinking song. The poem was published in the first issue of Pan, April through May 1895. She slightly altered Demmel's refrain, Singt mir das Lied vom Tod und von Leben, most likely to emphasize the power of death over life. Demmel's poem is a plea to celebrate life before it comes to an end. Dagny's a mournful cry that death is so ever present. It seems likely that she wrote the poems during the winter spring of 1898, when she and Stash spent some weeks in Spain, having left the children at Raleigh. They had first gone to Paris, but found themselves with neither money nor prospects until the Polish philosopher Vincent Ludoslawski invited them to his home in the little fishing village of Playa del Mera on the west coast. They stayed with him and his family from February to early March. Dagny wrote to a friend from Playa del Mera, silence reigns everywhere, which makes it easy to work. Stashu is more productive than ever. I have myself written some small pieces. There is a further, perhaps coincidental circumstance that links these poems to Dagny's time in Spain. Ludoslavsky recounted that he and Dagny had long discussions on the nature of love. She tried, he said, to convince him that centuries ago she had been destined for Stash. Ludoslavsky rejected the notion of predetermined love as nonsense. To convince Ludoslavsky of Dagny's sincerity, Stash told the following story. One day, the two of them sat on a precipice in Filtvet, overlooking the Oslo fjord. Stash suddenly asked Dagny to throw down a piece of family jewelry she always wore as a sign of her eternal love, and without hesitation she threw it into the fjord. Ludoslavsky said he thought her a fool. When Dagny and Stash left Playa del Mera, Ludoslavsky gave her a copy of Dante's Divine Comedy. These poems appear indeed to be about an obsession with fatal love, but they are far more profound than that, and they were certainly not written by a fool. They are complex lyrical reflections, riddled with contradiction, on the search for the lost self. Dagny sees her poet as destined to search for her soul in a fatal lover, ultimately driven like a ship at full sail, unresisting and docile. She also sees the lover as destined to fail her. He will consume her, misinterpret her, trick her, but he will not reveal her to herself. Although she clearly defines self-definition as life-giving, definition in terms of the other as life-threatening, she makes no overt authorial appeal for resistance to the fatal course of the other. Her poet's sense of self is too frail, yet her appeal is there all the same in her persistent, if fragile, presence, in the very theme of psychic frailty, and in the beauty of the few, fleeting images of self definition when her poet stops running toward the darkness, looks into herself, and sees the sun. The sum of these images is the critical, contrary, underlying text of Sing mir das Lied vom Leben und vom Tod. The first poem, bearing the motto of the entire cycle, also contains the themes that will be restated in variation in the other three. It opens with the startling image: a woman sitting, staring down at the corpse of her lover. Her state of mind is equally startling, for she is at peace, relieved, almost happy. Though he had made her a queen in the kingdom of love, his love had nearly killed her. His flowers had choked her, their tendrils had bound her hands and feet. His passion, which she could not return, had humiliated her. His jealousy had imprisoned her in ivy-covered walls. She awakens as from a nightmare, and in a gesture of liberation stretches out her arms in well-being, dispelling the images of imprisonment and suffocation. Time passes, and many men wish to know her, but she is enjoying the pleasure of her own feelings unconfined, and seeks a definition of her own making, rejecting traditional romantic male definitions of female worth and beauty. She wished for no eagle whose proud wings could fly her to the clouds, nor for a nightingale to sing her beauty's praise. She would fill her life with the rainbow-colored cobwebs of her own dreams. But the longing to find resolve in the overpowering other is too strong, and she begins to search in men's eyes, until one day a glance brings her to her knees. The dead man has come back to claim her. His eyes fill her with terror, and she resists, but he is too powerful. He returns as a glance, then a voice, then a heartbeat that invades the wind, the sea, and finally her own body, clutching at her from within and without. Oh. How it throbbed, this great, inscrutable heart that had beat only for her. She heard it in the sea, in the ground under her feet, in the great black mountains. And now she heard his sick heart full of love. Pardon. And now she heard his sick heart full of love throb inside her own, and she felt him put his long arms around her and press her to this heart that could not die, for it was so full of love. What do you got, bruv? The rainbow-colored cobwebs of her own dreams, perhaps too fragile from the start, are replaced by an internal altar to her dead lover. Thanks, Bubba. From queen to supplicant, she now offers up to him. She built a temple to him in her heart, and all her dreams, her pain, her longing, she let billow like frankincense around his image. Her heart is replaced by his heart. The ending is far worse than the beginning, for the imprisonment of her soul has led to the replacement of her soul, with not a trace left of herself and her beautiful cobwebs. The prose poem cycle as a whole repeats this same pendulum movement between rejection of the other, assertion of the self, and a helpless return to the other, each subsequent poem taking an image from the first and elaborating upon it, enlarging it like a photographer would a mysterious detail on a negative. The second poem, Et la tristesse de toute sila o mon ami, is the shortest, sparest, most powerful, and consequently the one around which the others must turn. From the first poem, it takes the linear image of liberation, the woman stretching out her arms to the winds, and magnifies it into an attempt to fly into the sun. The woman is standing at a piano singing. A man sits back and listens. She is turned inward, immersed in her own creative effort to break through the clouds with her song. The effort is painful, and the melody lifts its bleeding wings and flutters enwrapped into space, searching, searching, and turning back with a sigh. But finally she succeeds, and her song touches the sun. She stands there feeling pale and naked, afraid that she has too honestly sung of her pain and her longings that go far beyond the man who sits listening to her. But he has noticed nothing of her spiritual flight. He comments, unaware, "You have sung brilliantly. You have never taken high B so well before." This short poem, in relation to the other three, is the most complex and contains a strength they do not. Unlike the others that take place in stormy landscapes, lush flower gardens, and dark tombs, Et la Tristesse is anchored in a simple reality: a room with a piano, a woman singing, a man listening. The woman is erect and active, striving to create. Unlike any of the other variations of herself in the cycle, the image of her song, flying into the sun with bleeding wings, has no counterpart in power or importance. Dagny allowing it to dominate the poem completely. At the same time, the woman's experience of pain and isolation deriving from her creative attempt is intensified by her sense of exposure. We in turn feel a sympathy for her which we never do for the women of the other three poems. Et la Tristesse, or Tristesse, raises the question that quietly reverberates to the end of the cycle. Is it too painful for the woman to seek self-definition? Does it spell a death of another kind? The third poem, I Tus Morkit, momentarily sustains the theme of Et la Tristesse though the poet has assumed a more passive mood. The woman sits with her mysterious flower that sings the lost song of her soul, the hymn that she had forgotten. Dagny then reintroduces, however, the theme of the need for the fatal lover central to sing mir das Lied, developing the image of the suffocating flowers to tell once again her tale of spiritual death. Sitting securely with the flower of her soul, the poet reminisces about the many flowers she had known before she found her own. As she describes them in turn, she reveals a growing attachment to the macabre and the decadent. When she was young and innocent, she had loved the flowers for their adorning colors like jewels, gold in her hair, red on her arms, blue and white, tulips, violets, lilacs, but they had not moved her soul. Then she had loved the roses, which were dearest to her when they were dying. She enjoyed watching the leaves grow yellow at the edges. She filled both hands and let them fall one by one. Her love of death intensified, and she longed for secret flowers that no sun had shone upon, dangerous flowers carrying poison in their veins, numbing and incomprehensible. One day she found a dark and fatal plant with furry leaves and melancholy bells of color taken from heaven and earth. Retreating from the sun and from the woman in Et la Tristesse, moving toward the woman in Sing Mer das Lied. She took the flower home and built an altar to it, as she had built an altar to the image of her dead lover. But the flower withered like all the others, and she threw it into the street, resolving to have no more flowers. As if in revenge for her rejection of them, they threatened her life, as had her lover's flowers in Sing Mer das Lied. They grew up everywhere. They crowded around her, fluttered around in her parlor like birds of 1,000 wings and 1,000 colors. Radiant lilies licked her with burning human tongues, orchids, chrysanthemums, cacti, oleander, brown, yellow, mysterious red, blue like the fairy tale's glowing grotto. The fragrance bewildered her. Now she saw the whole flower flock stride toward her. They pushed at her, pressed against her. They breathed their awful breath into her face. She was choking. She was choking. Oh. What a fucking stupid ending. Oh. But then, just as she had temporarily awakened in the first poem from the nightmare of the dead lover, she awakens again with her own flower, which is transformed into the symbol of herself, a star shining over the miracle of her birth, the star over her soul. The star disappears, however, and the nightmare returns in the fourth and last poem of the cycle. In Questa Tomba Oscura, once again Dagny elaborates on an image from the first poem, this time the poisonous internal altar at which her poet will meet her death. In every sense, the poem is a retreat from the active, creative woman of Et la Tristesse. The space imagery is enclosed and womb-like. The poet moving first into a large vault, then down a narrow corridor lined with the living dead. Then into a tomb, as if she were literally shrinking back into the darkness of the womb. There is no sun, no flower, no color, save for the blood-red question burning in her soul. Who is she? She has no goal of her own, letting herself be driven like a ship at full sail. What was she looking for? She did not know herself. She closed her eyes and let herself drift unresistant. She has no control over herself or her environment. The scenes change suddenly, without warning, from a dark, windy street to the vault to the corridor, and finally to the tomb where she finds the dead man lying on a bier. I think that's a bier, isn't it? Copper green light billowing around him like her longing had billowed around the altar in her heart. She looks into his face and knows that only he could have given her the answer she seeks. But his mouth is silent and his eyes are closed. Then he tricks her. He stands behind her with big, living, burning eyes, frightened yet so greedy to know who she is. She whispers to him, the answer, give me the answer now. But his face stiffens and his cold hands clutch hers as the storm once again sang its wild psalm of death around her, and the black night covered her up forever. The remarkable, if appalling, aspect of the prose poems is the poet's diminished sense of self, which is Dagny's relentless underlying theme. These are not really poems about love. They are poems about an inner image so frail that at its strongest it is only a song flying into the sun, the eye of a dying flower, or cobwebs of dreams. The poet's overwhelming experience of herself is either as empty or invaded. The dead lover is, in essence, a metaphor for the horror of all she is not. In the lyric poems, the lover disappears as Dagny's poet confronts the nightmare of the shattered self, but now without the romantic framework of the prose poems. Music before everything, the cycle of lyric poetry. In a place sunlit and far away, my pale dead meet in festival, their moon-sick faces giving birth to a new and lasting peace for them and me. Once we sailed together on the river where life's riddles burned. Together with me they were doomed to command the voyage to the bottom where the rivers sailed to the sea. Now in a land sunlit and far away, bathed in sun, I sit, watch, and feel the power in my heart to bewitch unto the pain of oblivion in a festival dance around the old fire, a world brought home from Leith's shore. Unpublished. I'm not even going to attempt to read the Norwegian or Finnish or whatever it is. Dagny wrote a cycle of 13 lyric poems, which she called simply poems. They were not made public until 1975, when Martin Nag published them in Sam Tyden. A 14th poem, In a Place Sunlit and Far Away, was given to me by Dagny's daughter, Iwa Dalin. The cycle bears the motto De la musique avant toute chose. Music before everything, from Paul Verlaine's program poem Art Poetique. Symbolist in spirit and intent, Dagny's poems sing of the pain and alienation that reverberates through the surreal landscapes of the poet's spirit. Her kinship to Obstfelter is particularly evident in the sensual rhythms and dark mood of these poems. She shared, as did he, the French poet's belief that music held the key to a more original, psychologically truer poetic language. She also shared their obsession with death, dreading its oblivion, longing for its secret wisdom and its peace. As a poet, she expressed an unrelieved fear of living, like a child who feels she has committed some unforgivable sin. Punishment awaits her at every door. When the storm hurls itself around the house at night and the door opens wildly, I see fear standing in the doorway, gray-haired without mercy, and I do not own the sword that can cut off her head. When the moon, sick with revenge, sneaks in the house at night, and the door opens wildly and long, then in the doorway I see a hand stretched out long, dead, and I dare not shake it. When the sun shrieks in the sky in the daytime and spits its gold coins into the living room, then the door opens wide, and I see that the doorway is like the jaws of a beast. Dagny's unpublished poem, In a Place Sunlit and Far Away, might be the epilogue to the 13 poems of the lyric cycle. The poet, warm, calm, and powerful, looks down from a sunlit land beyond life, safe from the anxious landscapes of poems, watching her fellow dead dance around the old fire, as if it were a burnt offering to some greater god. Together they are bringing about a new and lasting peace in this fantasy of death and freedom from fear. Dagny probably wrote the poem cycle in late 1896, early 1897, when she and Stosh, without money and abandoned by their friends in the wake of Marta Forder's suicide, were living in Niederschanhausen on the outskirts of Berlin. Just before Christmas, Dagny had written Ragnhild, congratulating her on the birth of her second child. I think it's such a wonderful feeling to lie there with your baby beside you. Dagny must have been very pained, because she was separated from her own child, then only a little more than 1 year old, whom she had left at Raleigh with her mother and her sister Astrid. Perhaps in thanksgiving for her care, she dedicated the poem cycle to Astrid. At New Year's, she wrote to Ragnhild, "O God, how I long for Xenon. Astrid writes so many wonderful things about him. Still 3 to 4 months, and then, hurry, or hooray. She almost seems to be grieving for him." Stas wrote in February that she was composing long hymns to our little son who is in Norway and just beginning to talk. One of the poems of the cycle is dedicated to Xenon. Sleep, sleep, the angry voices grow silent, as if the day had spoken far too many words. Soon the angry voices will rise, walking storms in your golden kingdoms. Then the storm will open your frightened eyes. Sleep long. In her Christmas letter to Ragnhild, Dagny had written about the peace of Niederschonhausen. In the main, there are only villas here, widely spread out with surrounding gardens and wonderful avenues of chestnut and lime trees. I have never seen such trees, and so still, so still, so still. Stas, too, wrote to family and friends that he and Dagny were living serenely far from other people, playing cards and drinking toddies at night. Yet she could hardly have known much peace of mind. The scandal had cost them their friends. They had no money. Stas was drinking to excess. She was separated from her son, and she was pregnant for the second time. So still, so still, so still, she had written, as if she wished to withdraw into some soundless scene. Several of the poems call for a similar silence to descend on the poet's anxious world. She asks the star of her childhood to sink back into her anxious world, into her heart, pardon, and the child to sleep for a very long time. In one of the most moving poems of the cycle, the poet admonishes her listeners to be silent as she watches herself die. Be still, be still. The stars are singing a mysterious song about one who's walking for the last time through the rose garden. Be still, be still, be still. Do you see the smoking, flickering candle? Do you hear the snow falling in my heart? So hushed, so hushed. Be still, oh, be still. I hear a loved voice calling. Do you see all the stars falling over my life? Be still. The poems that speak of sleep and stillness are ominous resting places in this cycle that mourns the anxiety of life's journey. Time passes relentlessly, ever present like a snake, slithering along the horizon, destructive as 5 touching butterfly wings. The wind chases dust, gray butterflies, across the sky's deep golden ground. I see them flocking round the sun's red sphere. I see them burn up the very second their thin wings are illumined, then charred. They're spread over the heaven's murky floor. Now only a copper green, poisoned fly clings to the sun's giant rose, fading slowly over the horizon's arc. And the evening wind cries at my ears. When the sun sank, the shadows grew so long. What is hammering in the quiet of the night? What makes my heart so afraid? The poet sees life taken from her even as it is given, yet even more alienating than the brevity of her time is the fact that she is the only witness to her having ever been. She is completely alone. There has never been a lover to consume her. Nothing marks her passing but her own self consciousness. She sees herself as a byproduct of forces unaware. She exists no longer than a lyrical image, living and dying, her golden hair graying, in two short lines of a poem. Hot winds sweep through the valley of the night. 1,000 wild eyes quickly tremble. The sleeping earth moans anxiously in its dreams, feels the kiss on its will-less mouth. All the golden leaves in a whirl, the last dance, my golden hair, a wreath of fire, and soon so pale. The earth opens its wide womb, and seething floods flow forth, glowing flowers, grand as rainbows, blood and fire, with terror's might, raise their arms toward the shining stars. Gentle winds sweep through the valley of the night. 1,000 golden stars quickly tremble. The sleeping earth smiles calmly in its dreams, feels the kiss on its closed mouth. The poet captures herself, the poet captures her conscious self only in the single use of one personal pronoun and a fleeting reference to her golden head of hair. The nature that conceives her, gives her life, and envelops her again is oblivious to her. Yet, at the same time, she is the issue of the earth's surreal orgasm birth, just as she is the earth's sister spirit, her flaming hair a parallel to the earth's flood and flowers, blood and fire. By virtue of association, she shares the earth's surge of power, ecstasy, and rage at being quickened to life, then passed over by the forever blowing winds. But her identification with the earth remains by virtue of association only. The two are never united. She is a golden head of dying hair. The earth remains a dark, magnificent body. The one never knows the other. Dagny seems to raise her own arms up in fury toward the sky, protesting a world in which she has never been allowed to be. Her poet is trapped in humanless landscapes where she is condemned to go on looking for herself. When she catches a glimpse of who she is or might have been, she speaks in intrinsically female metaphors of natal fluids and blood. In the poem Two Strong, Pale Heads, she sees herself schizophrenically divided, the one self on a mountaintop lighting a signal fire, the other the bloody memory of who she is, powerfully swimming toward the fire she has lit. There is madness in the ceremony, but she welcomes it as it holds her tight in its magnificent, gentle hands, and her heart breaks. In The River Flows Dull and Dead, one of the few poems in which the poet commands her landscape, she presides over it like some giant priestess in the thrones of menstrual pain. She straddles a river full of dirty, clotted blood on which sails a boat with a flame red sail. A bat, a friendly spirit, hovers over the mast. Dressing herself in the bat's colors, she puts on the gray hood of night and makes her way through the dammed up valley. She empties fresh blood from her chalice into the river, and it begins to flow free. The release of the flood of her power triggers a series of fantasies of who she is. She nods in collusion to the bat, her gray sister, who makes her think of her nightmare. The child of her pain, its claws seems to touch her, and she thinks of its black wings that ensnare her dreams as if they were flocks of birds. She imparts to this sinister sisterly creature her fantasies, her dreams, her spiritual and intellectual self. Yet she remains forever separated from her. The poem ends in a mad, schizophrenic image. the gray sister staring into her mind, which is nothing more than an empty cavity, as they both stare into the sun that pours its golden flood over the river's blood. Looking into the sun can only mean death for this female priestess, forever separated from herself in life. The poems of the cycle are all existential nightmares about the divided self. There is no lost lover, no soulmate for whom the woman searches. She is searching only for other parts of herself, strewn across these soul landscapes like limbs lost in battle. She sees her twin self as a bloody memory swimming toward shore, a beast at the door, a sisterly bat full of dark dreams, a head of burning hair. Her past is separated from her present, her fear from her will, her creative dreams from her consciousness, her head from her womb. She is imprisoned with her own acute self consciousness, watching herself die, sometimes quietly, as the snow falls in her heart, sometimes violently as the butterflies burn up in the sun. Yet, in the very quiescence of her poet, Dagny also found an image of great strength. She may have lived forever fearful of extinction, but she remained in her poems to face her fears. It is the image of the woman staring into the sun, standing at the open door, bearing witness to her own death, that we see even after the other images have begun to fade. All of Dagny's works are marked by the schizophrenia so apparent in poems. In the plays, her heroine is torn asunder by her many voices. In the prose poem, she loses herself in her projection of the other. In the final analysis, it is the nightmare of the shattered image, inner image, that is the quintessence of her works. If her poems and plays are the black mirrors in which she saw herself reflected, they reveal an alienated woman living in a world of fatal extremes, all of which finally came to stand for only one thing: rebellion or passivity, passion or innocence, darkness or sunlight, snow or fire. All became metaphors of death in her hands. Yet, she faced her demons with such courage, embraced her passion with such intensity, her passivity with such longing, her fear with such wide eyes that she imbued her works with a spiritual longing for life. They lay bare the soul of a very conflicted, noble woman who looked into herself and could not lie about what she saw. Stasha's dedication in the posthumously published When the Sun Goes Down captured for once the most significant link between her art and herself. Her soul was far too honest, far too daring, far too proud, and that was her tragedy. She could not bear that a shadow of falseness or hypocrisy should fall upon her. It was her tragedy that she was what her art is: beauty and honesty. It is a bitter yet fitting irony that Dagny should have inspired a myth of integration and infinite mobility when she wrote of a self-divided and deadly limited. Clearly, she was at the heart of both, though one momentarily loses sight of the swirling solo dancer in the overwhelming darkness of her poetry. Right. All right, that's all for now.